The silence in the penthouse was not peaceful. It was heavy, pressurized, like the air inside a vault that held too many secrets. Min-jae Park sat on the edge of the expansive leather sofa, the city skyline of Seoul glimmering indifferently behind floor-to-ceiling glass. His shirt was off, revealing a landscape of old scars and new bruises, a testament to the import-export disputes that constituted his family's legacy. He flinched, a microscopic tightening of his jaw, as the antiseptic wipe grazed a fresh laceration on his shoulder. Standing over him, Amara Okafor worked with the rhythmic efficiency of someone who had seen far worse than a rich man's occupational hazards. Her dark green nurse scrubs were functional, almost hiding the grace of her movements, but her hands were gentle, contradicting the clinical detachment in her eyes. She applied the bandage with a final, firm press, her fingers lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before she pulled away. "You need to stop moving your arm, Min-jae," Amara said, her voice a smooth alto that seemed to absorb the room's tension rather than reflect it. She peeled off her gloves, the snap of latex echoing in the quiet room. "The stitches will hold, but only if you don't treat your body like a battering ram for at least 48 hours. She turned to her medical bag, organizing her supplies with meticulous care. She had been his private nurse for 6 months, hired for her discretion and her unparalleled skill in trauma care, but mostly for her refusal to be intimidated by the armed men who stood guard in the lobby. She treated the head of the park syndicate with the same no-nonsense authority she would use on an unruly patient in an ER triage unit. It was that lack of fear, that refusal to fawn over his power, that made Min-jae watch her now with a gaze that was less analytical and more desperate than he cared to admit. "I have obligations, Amara," Min-jae replied, rolling his shoulder experimentally and ignoring her sharp look of warning. He reached for a silk dress shirt draped over the armrest, wincing slightly as he pulled it on. "Specifically, the Foundation Gala on Friday. It is the one night of the year where my family pretends our money comes exclusively from technology and real estate. Absence is interpreted as weakness." He buttoned the shirt, his fingers deft, covering the violence written on his skin with a veneer of expensive civility. He paused, looking at her reflection in the darkened window. She was closing her bag, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. He had spent years attending these events with women who were vetted by his lieutenants, beautiful, silent mannequins who knew the rules. But the thought of another evening of vapid conversation and calculated laughter made his chest ache more than the wound on his shoulder. "Then go," Amara said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Just don't lift anything heavier than a champagne flute." She moved toward the elevator, her work done. She was a professional. She had bills to pay, a family back home to support, and a nursing license she protected fiercely. Getting involved in the personal theatrics of the Park family was not in her job description. She pressed the call button, watching the numbers descend. "Amara," Min-jae's voice stopped her. It wasn't a command, which surprised her. It sounded like an inquiry, tentative and stripped of his usual executive polish. She turned. He was standing now, buttoned up, looking every inch the untouchable king of Seoul's underworld, yet his eyes betrayed a profound, isolating exhaustion. "The roster my advisors provided for a companion. It is predictable, exhausting. I need someone who can actually hold a conversation. Someone who can read a room better than my security detail." He took a step closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "Come with me. To the ball." Amara blinked, her grip on her medical bag tightening. The invitation hung in the air, absurd and dangerous. She was a nurse in scrubs. He was a man who commanded armies in the shadows. "Min-jae," she said, her tone dipping into a warning. "I am your employee, and I don't belong in a room full of sharks in tuxedos." "You handle sharks every time you stitch me up," he countered softly. "I don't want a date, Amara. I want an ally. Someone real." The morning sun hit the marble floors of the foyer with blinding intensity, a stark contrast to the shadowy mood of the previous night. Amara had returned to check Min-jae's vitals, a routine visit that felt charged with unanswered questions. She was checking the inventory in the medical cabinet in the hallway when the front doors opened. It wasn't Min-jae, but Junho, his second-in-command and childhood friend, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He was accompanied by two other associates, men in sharp suits who treated the penthouse like a war room. They stopped when they saw Amara, their conversation halting abruptly. Junho looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her dark green scrubs with a sneer of amusement. To them, she was a utility, a piece of equipment necessary for maintenance, nothing more. "The boss is in the study," Amara said, not looking up from her clipboard. "He is not to be disturbed until I finish his assessment." She kept her voice even, knowing that showing fear to men like Junho was like bleeding in water. Junho chuckled, stepping closer, invading her personal space just enough to be unsettling. "Assessment. Right?" He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "I heard a rumor, Nurse Okafor." "A very funny rumor." He glanced at his associates, who smirked in anticipation. "Min-jae seems to be under the impression that he can bring his medical staff to the Foundation gala. I told him it must be the painkillers talking. Surely, he isn't actually thinking of parading the help in front of the ministers and the CEOs." Amara felt the heat rise up her neck, not from shame, but from a burning, righteous anger. She slowly lowered the clipboard, meeting Junho's gaze. "Mr. Park's social calendar is none of my business," she lied smoothly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "And my role here is to ensure he survives the stress you people cause him." Min-jae's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. Junho. He stood in the doorway of his study, looking impeccable in a gray suit, though his stance was stiff. He hadn't heard everything, but he had heard enough. He walked over, placing himself physically between his lieutenant and Amara. The protective gesture was subtle, but to the men in the room, it was a shouting match. "Amara is essential to my recovery. You will treat her with the respect due to the person who keeps me breathing." "Of course, Min-jae," Junho said, raising his hands in mock surrender, though his tone dripped with condescension. "I'm just looking out for the optics. The board is already nervous about the Western expansion. Walking in with her might send the wrong message. It looks desperate. Like you couldn't secure a match from one of the families." He cast one last dismissive look at Amara. "Some people are built for the palace, and some are built to clean it. It's better for everyone if we don't confuse the 2-inch. The associates laughed, a low, cruel sound that stripped Amara of her credentials and reduced her to her demographic and her uniform. Min-jae's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening, but before he could speak, Amara stepped forward. She didn't look at Junho. She looked at Min-jae. The insult had done exactly what fear couldn't. It had made up her mind. She saw the shame in Min-jae's eyes, not for her, but for his inability to silence his own world without causing a war. "I'll check your vitals now, Mr. Park," she said, her voice icy and professional. "And we can discuss the schedule for Friday evening." Later that afternoon, the penthouse was quiet again, save for the hum of the HVAC system and the distant city noise. Amara sat in the kitchen, a mug of tea warming her hands. Across from her sat Dae-hyun, Min-jae's personal driver and perhaps the only person in the organization with a functioning sense of humor. He was polishing an apple on his sleeve, watching Amara with a knowing grin. He had driven her home enough times to know she was more than just a nurse. She was a woman of sharp wit and deep pride. "So," Dae-hyun said, taking a loud crunch of the apple. Junho was being a prick. "In other news, water is wet and the sky is blue," he chewed thoughtfully. "But I saw the boss's face. He looked like he wanted to throw Junho off the balcony." "That's new." "It's not funny, Dae-hyun," Amara sighed, staring into her tea. "They think I'm a joke. Aprop. If I go to this gala, I'm walking into a firing squad. They'll tear me apart for not knowing which fork to use, or for wearing the wrong designer." She shook her head. "I spent 6 years in nursing school to save lives, not to be sneered at by gangsters in tuxedos." "You think Min-jae asked you because he needs a nurse on standby?" Dae-hyun asked, his voice dropping the playful edge. "Amara, look. The man is surrounded by sharks and parasites. He spends his life wondering who is going to stab him in the back. When he looks at you, he sees the only person who tells him the truth. That scares Junho. That scares all of them. He leaned forward. If you don't go, Junho wins. He proves that you know your place. Is that who you are? The question hung in the air. Amara thought of her mother, who had worked 3 jobs so Amara could get her degree. She thought of the dignity she carried into every hospital room. She stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. She walked out of the kitchen and straight to Min Jae's office. He was reviewing documents, looking weary. He looked up as she entered, expecting a medical update. I will go, Amara said, her voice steady. Min Jae put his pen down, his full attention snapping to her. But I have conditions. I am not going as your employee. I am not going as a prop to make you look progressive. I choose my own dress. I speak my own mind. And if anyone, including your friends, disrespects me, I leave. And I don't just leave the party, Min Jae. I leave this job. Min Jae stood up slowly. For the first time in months, the guarded darkness in his eyes lifted, replaced by a flicker of genuine admiration. He nodded, a solemn gesture of a pact being formed. Agreed, he said softly. You are not a prop, Amara. You are the guest of honor. Buy whatever you want.
Send the bill to me.
No budget. I don't need your money for my dignity, Amara corrected him, a small smile finally touching her lips. But I will take the corporate card for the dress. Because if I'm going to war, I need armor. The boutique was a cathedral of silk and chiffon, a place where price tags were absent because if you had to ask, you didn't belong. Amara stood before the trifold mirror, the sales assistants hovering nervously with armfuls of pastel, modest gowns, the kind suitable for a demure date of a powerful man. Beige, powder blue, soft pink. They were safe. They were boring. They were exactly what Junho expected her to wear, something that would make her blend into the wallpaper, invisible and harmless. No, Amara said, dismissing a beaded cream gown. These are for hiding. I need something for arriving. She walked through the racks herself, her fingers trailing over the fabrics. She stopped at a mannequin in the back. The dress was a deep, vibrant red, the color of arterial blood, the color of passion, the color that demanded the eye. It was sleeveless, with a neckline that was elegant but daring, structured to showcase strength rather than fragility. The fabric was a heavy silk crepe that fell like water. It was a dress for a woman who owned the room, not one who asked permission to enter it. That one, she said. The preparation was a ritual. On the day of the gala, Amara did not rush. She showered, scrubbing away the smell of antiseptic and the hospital. She applied her makeup with precision, highlighting her high cheekbones, painting her lips a shade that matched the dress. She pulled her hair back into a sleek, sophisticated bun that left her neck exposed, a line of vulnerability she was daring the world to target. When she stepped into the dress, it felt like a transformation. The fabric hugged her curves, the red vibrant against her dark skin. She wasn't just Amara the nurse anymore. She was Amara the woman, a force of nature. She looked at herself in the mirror. The doubt was still there, a quiet hum in the back of her mind, but it was drowned out by the visual evidence of her own power. She thought of Min Jae's scars. She thought of the way he looked at her when he asked her to come. He wasn't asking for a decoration. He was asking for a partner. She took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. She slipped on gold earrings, simple but heavy. She was ready. When she walked out into the living room of her small apartment, Dae-hyun was waiting to drive her. He dropped his magazine, his mouth falling open. Holy, he muttered, quickly correcting himself. Dr. Okafor. The boss is going to have a heart attack. I might have to drive us to the ER instead. Amara laughed, the sound bright and nervous. Let's go, Dae-hyun. Don't keep the Mafia waiting. The venue was an opera house converted for the evening, a palace of gold leaf and velvet. A red carpet stretched up the stairs, flanked by photographers whose flashes popped like strobe lights. Black limousines idled in a line, depositing the elite of Seoul, politicians, tycoons, and the crime lords who pulled their strings. The air was thick with perfume and the hum of judgment. Min-jae stood near the entrance, checking his watch. He was dressed in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, tailored to hide the bandage on his shoulder. He looked imperious, cold, and utterly bored. Jun-ho stood nearby with his own date, a famous actress who looked terrified to breathe wrong. Jun-ho was smirking, checking his phone, likely making bets on whether the nurse would show up in a pantsuit or something off the rack from a department store. "She's late," Jun-ho murmured, loud enough for the circle of sycophants to hear. "Maybe she got lost. Or maybe she realized the staff entrance is around the back." Min-jae ignored him, his eyes fixed on the arrival lane. A sleek black sedan pulled up. Dae-hyun hopped out, bypassing the valet to open the rear door himself with a flourish that was uncharacteristically respectful. The crowd quieted slightly, the natural lull of curiosity. A leg emerged, then the rest of her. Amara rose from the car, smoothing the red dress. The streetlights caught the fabric, making it glow. She stood tall, her posture impeccable, her chin lifted. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked straight up the stairs, her eyes locking onto Min-jae. The silence that fell over the group at the top of the stairs was absolute. It wasn't the polite silence of arrival. It was the stunned silence of recalibration. Jun-ho's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed stare. The whispers died in throats. Amara Okafor did not look like hired help. She looked like a queen visiting a foreign court. Min-jae felt his breath hitch. He had known she was beautiful. He saw it every day in the harsh light of his apartment. But this was different. This was weaponized beauty. She began to ascend the stairs, the red dress flowing around her, the crowd parting instinctively. As she reached the top, she didn't stop at the periphery. She walked straight to Min-jae, ignoring Jun-ho completely. Min-jae stepped forward, closing the distance, his face breaking into a rare, genuine smile that the cameras frantically tried to capture. He offered his arm, not as a crutch, but as an offering. "You're late," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I had to put on my armor," Amara replied, looping her arm through his. She felt the tension in his bicep, the solid reality of him. She glanced at Jun-ho, offering him a cool, polite nod that was more devastating than any insult. "Shall we go inside, Mr. Park? I believe we have a room to silence." The ballroom was a cavern of crystal and malice, beautiful to the eye, but suffocating to the spirit. Inside, the air was cooler, conditioned to preserve the heavy makeup of the socialites and the fragile egos of the tycoons. As Min-jae and Amara moved through the crowd, the sea of black tuxedos and pastel gowns parted, not out of politeness, but out of a sharp, instinctive curiosity. Min-jae felt the eyes on them, heavy, assessing, calculating the cost of Amara's dress and the provenance of her confidence. He kept his arm firm beneath hers, a silent anchor. He was used to being the most dangerous man in the room, the one people whispered about but never spoke to directly. Tonight, however, the danger felt different. It wasn't the threat of violence, it was the threat of exposure. Amara was too bright, too real for this artificial world, and he felt a sudden, fierce urge to shield her, to take her back to the quiet safety of the penthouse where she was just Amara and he was just a man with a bad shoulder. They were intercepted near the Champagne Tower by Chairman Lee, an elderly industrialist with a smile like a bear trap. Lee had been a thorn in the Park family's side for decades, a man who believed lineage was the only currency that mattered. He held a flute of vintage Krug, his eyes darting over Amara with open skepticism. "Min-jae," Lee boomed, his voice carrying over the string quartet. "We didn't expect to see you. And certainly not with company." He turned his gaze fully on Amara, waiting for her to shrink. "I don't believe we've been introduced. Which family are you from? The Kims of Busan? The Cho estate?" It was a trap, a way to highlight her lack of pedigree in 3 seconds flat. Min-jae opened his mouth to deliver a cutting retort, but Amara squeezed his arm gently, silencing him. She didn't flinch. She didn't look at the floor. She looked Chairman Lee in the eye, her expression pleasant, but holding the steel of a woman who had managed triage units during catastrophic failures. "I am from the Okafor family of Lagos, Chairman," she said, her voice clear and melodic, carrying a distinct pride that confused the old man. "But you wouldn't know them from the boardrooms. You would know my work, however. I manage the trauma recovery for the patients your factories discard when their safety protocols fail." The silence that followed was deafening. Chairman Lee's smile faltered. Amara picked up a glass of water from a passing tray, looking entirely at ease. "In fact, I was just reading the prospectus for tonight's charity auction. It's raising money for pulmonary health. Ironic, isn't it? Since your chemical plants are the leading cause of respiratory issues in the Southern District. I'm here to make sure the money actually buys ventilators and not just tax write-offs." She took a sip of water, the red dress glowing under the chandelier light. Around them, a few younger executives covered their mouths to hide amused smirks. Min-jae felt a surge of adrenaline that had nothing to do with combat.
It was awe.
She hadn't just deflected the insult. She had turned the social hierarchy upside down with nothing but facts and composure. Chairman Lee sputtered, muttering an excuse about needing to find his wife, and retreated into the crowd. Min-jae leaned in close to her ear, his breath warm against her neck. "Remind me never to cross you in a debate," he whispered, his voice low and intimate. Amara looked up at him, her eyes dancing with a mix of nerves and triumph. "I told you," she whispered back. "I'm not a prop." The string quartet faded out, replaced by a lush, orchestral swell that signaled the beginning of the formal dancing. It was a waltz, classic, demanding, and intimate. The center of the room cleared, leaving a vast expanse of polished parquet floor. Usually, this was the moment Min-jae retreated to the balcony to smoke and broker deals in the shadows. He hated the performative nature of the dance, the way it forced intimacy with strangers. But tonight, the music felt like an invitation he couldn't refuse. He looked at Amara. She was watching the dancers with a soft expression, the warrior edge from the confrontation with Chairman Lee softening into something more wistful. He realized with a pang of guilt that she had probably never been taken to a place like this, never been given the fairy tale without the nightmare attached. "Dance with me," Min-jae said. It wasn't a question. He held out his hand, palm up, exposing the lifeline to her. Amara hesitated, glancing at his shoulder. "Your stitches," she murmured, her nurse's instinct warring with the woman in the red dress. The rotation of a waltz. "Min-jae, if you tear them, I'm the one who has to fix it." "Then you can lecture me later," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Right now, I need to hold you." She took his hand. Her skin was warm against his, a contrast to the cool air of the ballroom. He led her to the floor, ignoring the ripples of gossip that followed them. When he placed his right hand on her waist, he felt the structured silk of her dress and the firm, living warmth beneath it. She placed her left hand cautiously on his shoulder, her fingers light, instinctively avoiding the injury, her touch a ghost of care even in the middle of the spectacle. As they began to move, the world narrowed down to the 3 feet of space between them. Min-jae was a trained dancer, a skill forced upon him by his upbringing, but he had never danced like this. He wasn't leading her like a puppet. He was moving with her. "Everyone is staring," Amara whispered, though she didn't pull away. She stepped into his space, her red skirt swirling around his dark trousers like a flame licking at coal. "Let them stare," Min-jae replied, his voice rough. He pulled her slightly closer, breaking the polite distance mandated by society. He could smell her perfume, sandalwood and something floral, like jasmine. It was intoxicating. "They are staring because they are starving, Amara. They have money, status, and power, but they are empty. They look at you and they see something they can't buy. They see life." He spun her, and for a moment, she threw her head back, laughing softly, a genuine sound that cut through the pretension of the room. When she looked back at him, her expression had changed. The guard was down. Her eyes searched his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw, the shadow of exhaustion under his eyes. "And what do you see?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the violins. Min-jae slowed their pace, holding her gaze with an intensity that made her breath hitch. I see the only thing in this room that matters, he confessed. I see the woman who saves me, over and over again. The spell was broken not by the end of the music, but by the inevitable intrusion of reality. Min-jae was pulled away by a grim-faced associate regarding an urgent security matter at the docks, leaving Amara alone near the terrace doors. She needed a moment to breathe. The intensity of the dance, the heat of Min-jae's hand on her waist, had left her shaken. She slipped into the ladies' lounge, a sanctuary of marble and gold leaf that was quieter than the ballroom. She leaned against the sink, pressing her cool palms to her flushed cheeks, staring at her reflection. She looked like she belonged, but she felt like an imposter who had just narrowly avoided detection. The door opened, and the air temperature seemed to drop. It was the woman Junho had been speaking to earlier, Min-jae's aunt, a matriarch of the clan who held no official title but wielded terrifying influence. She was small, elegant, and wore diamonds that could feed a city. She moved to the mirror next to Amara, pulling out a lipstick with slow, deliberate movements. She didn't look at Amara, she looked at Amara's reflection, dissecting her with a surgical gaze. Red is a bold choice, the older woman said, her voice like crushing velvet. It suggests passion, ambition. It suggests you think you are the main character in the story. She capped her lipstick, the click echoing in the tiled room. Min-jae has always had a weakness for broken things,
Stray dogs.
charity cases. He likes to feel useful. He likes to feel like a savior. Amara stiffened, turning slowly to face the woman. I am not a charity case, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. And I am certainly not a stray dog. The aunt smiled, a pitiable expression that was worse than a scowl. Oh, my dear.
You are distraction.
A very beautiful, very vibrant distraction from a life that is dark and cold. But distractions are temporary. Next month, he will need to merge our shipping lines with the Han family. That requires a marriage. A real marriage. To a woman who understands that silence is a virtue and that bloodlines are destiny, she stepped closer, placing a withered hand on Amara's forearm. Enjoy the champagne. Enjoy the dress. Take a few pictures. But do not make the mistake of thinking you can stay in the palace after midnight. The wolves will eat you alive, and Min-jae will be too busy running the pack to stop them. She swept out of the room, leaving Amara standing alone in the silence. The words dug deep, hitting the exact insecurity Amara had been fighting all week. A distraction. Was that it? Was she just a way for Min-jae to rebel against his family for one night? She looked down at the red dress. It suddenly felt like a costume. She felt foolish. She felt exposed. She grabbed her clutch, her heart hardening. She wouldn't wait to be discarded. She would leave on her own terms, just as she had arrived. Min-jae found her near the valet stand outside. The night air was brisk, carrying the smell of rain. Amara was standing apart from the crowd, her arms wrapped around herself, the vibrant energy of the evening drained away. She looked small against the backdrop of the imposing city skyline. When he approached, she didn't turn to face him. Her profile was etched with a cold resolve that terrified him more than any gun he had ever faced. Amara, he said, reaching out. I dealt with the issue. We can go back inside, or we can leave. Whatever you want. I want to go home, she said, her voice flat. She finally turned to him, and her eyes were dry, clear, and devastatingly distant. And by home, I mean my apartment, not your penthouse. The ride in the back of the sedan was excruciatingly silent. The privacy partition was up, sealing them in a box of leather and tension. Min-jae watched the city lights blur past, his heart hammering against his ribs. He knew something had happened. He could feel the wall she had erected, brick by brick, in the last hour. Tell me, he demanded softly, breaking the silence.
Who spoke to you?
Was it Junho? Was it my aunt? It doesn't matter who it was, Amara said, staring out the window. They told me the truth. The truth you were too polite to say. She turned to him, and the anger finally flared, hot and bright.
I am a nurse, Min-jae.
I fix people. I don't play games with dynasties.
Tonight.
Tonight was a fantasy. But fantasies end. You have a merger to plan. You have a marriage to arrange. And I have a shift at the clinic on Monday. Is that what you think this is? Min-jae's voice rose, cracking with frustration. A game? Isn't it? Amara shot back. You brought me there to make a point to your family. To show them you own yourself. I was the prop, Min-jae. The bold choice in the red dress. But I am not going to be your secret comfort while you marry some heiress to secure your shipping lines. I won't be the woman you visit in the dark. Stop the car, Min-jae commanded. Dae-hyun, sensing the volatility, pulled over instantly to the curb of a quiet street. Min-jae turned to Amara, ignoring the pain in his shoulder as he shifted to face her fully. He took her hands. She tried to pull away, but he held on, desperate. I didn't bring you to make a point, he said, his voice shaking. I brought you because when I am in a room with 500 people, you're the only one I see. You're the only one who doesn't look at my money or my scars. You look at me. You think I care about the shipping lines? You think I care about the Han family merger? I would burn it all down before I let them dictate my life again. He brought her hand to his chest, pressing it over his heart, which was beating frantically. I don't want a mistress, Samara. I don't want a secret. I want the woman who had the courage to tell Chairman Lee to go to hell. I want you. Amara looked at him, searching for the lie, but finding only raw, bleeding honesty. The defense mechanism she had built up, the pride, the professional distance, began to crumble. You are a dangerous man, Min-jae, she whispered, her voice trembling. Your world destroys things. Then help me build a new one, he pleaded. He leaned in, closing the distance until their foreheads touched. Stay. Not as my nurse. As my partner. 3 months later, the headline on the Seoul Business Daily was not about a gang war or a scandal. It was about the launch of the Park Okafor Medical Initiative, a massive endowment directed toward public health clinics in the industrial sector. The photo accompanying the article showed Min-jae Park cutting a ribbon. He looked different, healthier, the shadows under his eyes gone, his suit sharp but less armor-like. Beside him, standing not behind but firmly at his side, was Amara. She wasn't wearing scrubs, nor was she wearing a ball gown. She wore a tailored cream suit that spoke of authority and elegance. They were in the back of the car again, but this time, the partition was down, and sunlight flooded the cabin. Min-jae was reading a file on his tablet, his hand resting absently on Amara's knee. Amara was scrolling through her phone, smiling at a text from Dae-hyun, who is now officially head of their personal security detail and complained daily about the lack of drama. The board is still grumbling about the cost of the new pediatric wing, Min-jae noted, though he didn't sound concerned. He sounded like a man who enjoyed the fight. Amara didn't look up from her phone. Tell them if they complain again, I'll have them sit through a 4-hour seminar on infectious disease vectors. Min-jae chuckled, closing the tablet. He looked at her, a look of profound, settled contentment. The public scrutiny was still there. The whispers hadn't vanished entirely. There were still people who called her the nurse queen behind her back, thinking it was an insult. They didn't realize she wore the title like a badge of honor. She had kept her job at the hospital, reducing her hours but refusing to quit, keeping one foot in the real world to ensure Min-jae never drifted too far back into the shadows. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. The scar on his shoulder had healed into a thin white line, a memory of the night it all began. Are you ready for the gala tonight? He asked. I hear the theme is spring renewal. Amara smiled, turning to kiss his cheek. I already picked my dress, she said, her eyes gleaming. And this time, I'm driving. Min-jae laughed, the sound echoing in the car, light and free. As you wish, he said. Just don't scratch the rims. They drove on through the city, not above it or beneath it, but part of it, two people who had stopped fighting the world and started changing it, together.